Greetings. Welcome to control flow with JavaScript. Right? So, if statements, right? Conceptually, they operate the same way. We're still going to have if, then an alternative, and then an else, based on different parameters. If this thing ends up being true, then do some stuff. Otherwise, do some other stuff, right? Same idea. We're going to practice writing it inside of a function. So we're going to have function determine age. We'll take in age. Now, rather than this, we're going to have our curly braces. And so inside of this, we'll have a number of other things which also have curly braces. Because again, we don't have the tabs here. They don't matter. So we'll have if, and then our truth or our true or false statement here, we're going to put it inside of parentheses, right? So if age is less than 18, right? Then, and again, we have these curly braces to put this inside of that. I believe theoretically you can run JavaScript all in one line. You don't have to actually enter it all. It's just for our visibility. Don't recommend it. Don't recommend trying. But we're going to return minor. Okay. And then on the same line as our first curly braces end, right? In this case, this would be an entire statement. But what if I wanted to add an elif? Well, in JavaScript, instead of elif, we have else if. And we'll do it again, but this time we'll have age is greater than or equal to 18. So if they are 18 years old. And, okay, so instead of writing and, we do the two and signs here. Age is less than 65. Return adult. And then again, we can do this with else. You don't need to put anything in the parentheses here because else will just cover all the other statements, all the other cases, and we'll have return senior. Okay? And we can test this with console.log, and you can try your own, determine age, your own numbers for this. We'll put in 45, right? And this should put back adult. Very nice. We can try 15, be a minor, so on and so forth. Delightful. All right. Let's do this a different way. So there's actually oh man, hold on, I gotta pause and see what the name for this thing is. I'll be right back. Just kidding. Okay, I actually remembered it before I even had to look it up. Ternary operators, right? And so what this will do is there's an interesting way of putting this out. So here we go. Ternary operators. And you can Google it. Okay, conditional operator. It's kind of neat. You end up with a question mark as part of it, and we'll see how that works on our own code here. But if you ever want to look that up, ternary operators. And by the way, MSN or the MDN web docs by Mozilla. They've got really great documentation for JavaScript. So if you're looking for how to use JavaScript, I don't remember. I tend to not use W3 schools for all of this stuff. I tend to use the MDN web documentation. Lots of really good. I mean, so like here's our and operator, right? So, anyways, but ternary operators. Okay, so we'll have function determine age 2. We're going to put in age. And our statement here will be return age less than 18. Minor. Ooh. Okay. And then we'll have age greater than equal to 18. And age is less than or equal to 65. And if that's true, then we'll say adult, not retired. And otherwise, right, so again, so you can see this is the very same. It's a little tricky. But you'll see this is actually the same thing as what we have here, just arranged all on one single line using these question marks and these things, right? So the question mark is, if this thing is true, then do this next thing. Otherwise, do this other thing. And so we've actually got a couple of them. We got them kind of stacked, right? And so you'll see, you can actually highlight and see where stuff is parallel here, right? And so if this is true, then do adult not retired. And if neither of those are true, then we'll say elderly person not retired. don't know why the retired thing's in there. That's fine. I guess it's to see the age of our employees or something like that. Okay, so determine age 2, and we got all this stuff in here. Elderly person, adult, not retired, so on and so forth. But again, we're saying return, and then it's going to evaluate this entire statement, right? So again, first it's going to check if age is less than 18. If that's true, then it's minor. Otherwise, go on to the next section. This is the next section. Okay, so our next section is going to be here. If they're between 18 and 65, if that is true, then do this. If it's not true, skip this and go to the next section. And in this case, we don't have anything. So if we've gotten that far on our line of code, then we'll be there, and it will end up pulling that back. So let's try. And we'll do 11 years old, right? Go back here, just refreshed, so it's a minor. We can try 31, which will pull back an adult, not retired, so on and so forth. So you can see how that works. Might take some time to play around with some of that, make sure that you understand it, because you will see, again, this is kind of like the, this is kind of like the list comprehension in Python, right? Pulling this out, it makes your code run smoother and faster, and it looks better, it reads a little bit better for your computer, and that stuff's just kind of groovy. So, neato. Let's move on. Let's look at some loops. So function count by 1. There's that ye olde camel case returning, right? So we're going to do for let I equal 0. All right, Brandon, halt. That's wonky. It is wonky. That's because, again, we've got some slight differences. The same idea is going on here, but in Python, we just said I, right? We said, well, just make something called I, right? So far, we've got the Python version would be count by 1. Doesn't take anything in, right? And then we'll have for I in, we don't know yet. That's how far we are, okay? All we've done so far is said for I, right? And I starts at 0. And we're going to use our semicolons to separate these. I is less than 20, right? So for I in range 20, okay? So this is our start. This is our stop. And then our step is going to be I plus plus. Okay, whoa. All right, so what's happening here is this plus plus thing, right? We could also do I plus 1, and that's just going to be our step, basically, right? So every time that this loop happens, we're going to start at 0. We're going to keep looping until we get to 20, and every time the loop happens, we're going to add 1. But the best way to write this is just going to be plus plus. That's the shorthand version. It's the most common by far, and you might get weird looks if you put like I plus 1 or something weird like that, okay? But this just means that every time that this loop runs, it's going to actually add 1 to I. So this is our start, our stop, and our step here. As long as this is true, this will continue. If it's not true, it will evaluate false, and the loop will stop, right? So hopefully that makes sense for what that line is there. Again, you can see this is very similar to what this is. We could have, in Python, the explicit way to do this would be like that, okay? Let's see what we're going to do here. Again, we're going to use curly braces for our body, okay? And we're going to do console.log. We're going to spit out I. Okay, so these two are actually parallel right now, right? We haven't called either one. And then in this case, after the for loop is done, we're going to return counting has stopped, right? And what this is parallel to is in Python. Okay, I need to comment this out or else we'll get nasty grams from our JavaScript here. I did not call it, that's why it's not showing up. Brandon, come on, get with the program, wake up, you just had caffeine. Counting stops, we're going to do console.log count by 1. Delightful. Right, now it'll go. Woohoo! So we'll go 0 through 19. Again, we start with 0 indexing, even in JavaScript. So we will start with 0, and it will go up until it is 20, and on the loop where it becomes 20, it will say, nope, it's not less than 20 anymore. It will break, and then this part of the code will be done. The for loop will stop running, and we will return counting has stopped. But again, in JavaScript, you have to tell it exactly how many times you want it to loop. You could, for example, say if you had my array equals 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Okay. Length equals my array. I think I don't remember how to write that. But anyways, you would basically write something along those lines. You'd find the length of my array. I just don't remember how to do it off the top of my head because I've been in Python all week. But yeah, you would find the length of my array, and then you would essentially say I is less than like length my array, kind of a deal. I don't know if that'll actually work. Yeah, it's mad. But that would be the idea. So you can make that responsive to other things by pulling in other variables in there. Much like in Python, you could say in length of range, whatever. But there you go. All right, so there's all that. I don't even know if that's good Python, but whatever. That's not the point. This is one of the tricky things with switching back and forth between languages. Your brain gets a little bit foggy, and that's okay. If your brain's a little foggy with this, that's fine. We're gonna be in JavaScript all this week and next week, or not week, this module and next module, whatever. Yeah. So again, it's okay if some of the lines get a little bit blurred. It gets better with time. Good old me needs a little more time, but that's okay. Anyways, we'll keep moving on. It'll be groovy. So let's see what we're at. Count. Oh, we got decrease by 1. Here we go. So function decrease by 1. Right, to do the opposite. Right. In this case, we'd have 4. Let I equals 20. I is greater than 0, and I minus minus. Okay. So in this case, we're starting at 20. We're going to 0, and every time we go down by 1 per step. For our step. So then we'll just have console.log, and we'll just spit out I. Keep doing that, and then we're going to return. Doesn't need to be capitalized. Return. Counting has stopped. Okay. We haven't called it yet. Super. Okay, and now we start at 20, and we go down. To nothing. Very cool. Neat. All right, moving on. Counting with while, using a while loop. Just practicing some other stuff. So function count with while. Let I equals 0. So in this case, we're declaring I outside of our loop. Let text equals just an empty string. And then we're going to have while I is less than 10. All right. We'll say text, and we'll do plus equals. We got to use tick marks here. So if we're gonna add variables in to our strings, this is like the F statements formatting strings in Python. This number is, we're gonna use a $sign, curly braces, and then we can put in I, right? And then I'm going to do a space and do a \n, and that will be for a new line. That was the same thing in Python. That's just a general programming. Most languages end up using that \n. So while I is less than 10, we're going to add that to text. Now, obviously, we do not have a case where I is not less than 10. It's going to stay 0 for forever. So we need to add 1 to I. So we're going to do add 1 to I like that. I'm going to need that there too. All right, and then we're going to ultimately end up returning text. All right, and now let's call that. See how that works. Woo, there we go. So you can see I is changing there. That's delightful. That was what we were looking for. Pretty neat. Now we have a new kind of loop here, right? So we went over for loops. and now we're going over while loops. We have a new one that's, it's not obviously specific to JavaScript, but we don't have it in Python. So this is our first kind of new thing, right? And in this case, it's called a do-while loop. And do-while loops will happen at least one time, right? No matter what, even if the criteria are false, right? It doesn't matter. It will happen at least one time. And that's the really important part with this one. It can be very useful for certain things. Let's see. We'll have a do while loop. Function will be count with do while. Also, whatever. Anyways, doesn't take anything, and off we go. So we're going to let I equals 0. This is very similar to the last one. Let text equals empty string. Then we'll have do text plus equal. We use our tick marks. This number is I \n. Delightful. And we're going to have I plus plus. Nice. While I is less than 10. Return text. And it will run at least one time. So let's go ahead and it's mad about this one. So obviously that was not quite the right syntax. That's okay. The nice thing is that we get told about those things. But again, this is why you hear about jokes about unexpected semicolon in line 572. This is where that stuff comes into play. And programmers get irritated with things like semicolons. Okay. So, while I is less than 10, right? So even if I made that not a true statement, while I is greater than 10, that wouldn't make any sense. It will end up running at least once automatically. So we'll play around with that. Console.log count with do while. Doesn't take anything in, so we can go over here. And we see there it goes, and it stops at 10. Okay, very neat. Delightful. What if I change this backwards? Okay, so this is obviously not true, right? I is 0. It's not going to be greater than 10. Even if we add 1 to it, it's still not going to be true. And so you can see that it runs at least once, even though this while statement is, in fact, false. Okay, so I'm going to actually turn that back again, but you can see that by switching that, it still happens at least one time. That's great. It's very useful for certain things. So keep that in mind, that there is the do while that's a little bit different. All right. Last little bit here. We'll push through this and finish off this document. We're going to create an array. Let group of names. Actually, we're going to use the snake case for our variable declarations. Group of names equals Jerry, Ben, Bash. That needs to be a string. Brandon, pay attention to your screen. Brock, and we'll have Misty. And that's not spelled right. Goodness gracious. Okay. All right. To index, the first position, console.log, group of names, and it's just like Python. Delightful. How cool was that? We're going to have Jerry. Hello, Jerry. From Parks and Rec. Okay. We could say let Terry, Ben, Misty. And then we could take all three of those, Terry, Misty, Ben. Set them equal to group of names, which again is just overwriting that. Console.log, and we'll have Terry, Ben, and Misty. Let's see what this brings us back here. Yep. So, what ends up happening is we actually end up saving each of these as indexes, right? So the very first one, we kept it as Terry, right? So this became the value of Terry, okay? And Misty became the value of our well, I guess index 1, but our second item in our list. And Ben became this one, right? So if I were to just console.log Ben, okay, you'll see that that'll actually pull back bash because we set it up this way, right? So we've actually taken the values here and put them into those locations. I can't print out Brock here because I don't have anything saving that variable. I would have to actually do it this way instead. So you can see that it spit out bash. Now you also notice that these came back out again out of order because you're like, wait a second, bash is the second index, but when we spat it out, they're not in the same order. Well, that's because when we declared it, right, we had Terry, Misty, Ben, but you notice that we switched Ben and Misty on this line, right? So that's going to take the value here and the value here and switch them in the order when we're printing it, right? But if I were to console.log that list or that group of names, okay, it'll still pull back the whole list in order, which is neat. Just a cool trick, a little JavaScript party move thing. Cool. All right, looping through an array. Method 1 for looping through an array. Here we go. Here's that length thing that I was trying to show you earlier. Function show all. Nah, I'm not doing that. Show all names. For let I equal 0. I is less than group of names dot, there it is, length. Cool beans, right? And then we're just going to iterate up by 1 each time. And we need some curly braces, console.log group of names, and we're just going to pull out I. Very cool. And then at the end of it, we're going to return done. And the reason we're doing that is basically just because we don't want it to return undefined, because that's boring, right? So now we'll do console.log show all names. Nope, just the one. Thanks. There we go. So it works through them. Boom, 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 boom. Done. Ta-da! Fun times. All right. Method 2. A little shorter. But this time we're going to use an arrow function. So method 2. This is again why I say knowing the differences between the functions is very powerful. So console.log, it's more powerful if you spell it correctly, Brandon. Group of names dot for each. Okay? And this is basically a for loop, but it's built in, which is kind of cool, right? So for each, it will perform the specified action for each element in an array. It's kind of like mapping, but I probably shouldn't say that. But it kind of is. Right? So for each element in group of names, we're going to console.log that element, right? And again, we can call this whatever we want to. It doesn't really matter. If I do Control D here, I can just get rid of both of them and just say I. That will be fine. That'll work easy. I could say Alfredo sauce because that's what's on my mind apparently. It'll still work, okay? It doesn't return anything, so it gives back undefined, but that's okay, right? And instead of Alfredo sauce, we'll be more reasonable for your notes so that you can remember it later. We'll just leave it with element. Very cool. Delightful. All right. Okay. JS array method, array.toString. This is kind of neat. This will, I'll just show you. Log group of names dot toString. Okay. Let's see what that did. Woohoo! And this would be a string type, right? So you can see that we're not iterating over it anymore. It's not an array. It is a string. Good to know. Console.log. We can see type of group of names dot toString. We'll see what that is, and it should say string. There it is. Okay. Whereas if I just had group of names, now it should pull out object. Okay. Cool. Cool. Map, filter, and reduce. So first up, we'll have .map, right? We'll have let be names equal group of, no, that's not right, Brandon. Group, oh wait, did I have, yeah, group of names dot map I, and we're going to use an arrow function here, and here's what we're going to do to it. Okay, we're actually, so the function's called I guess, but that ends up being fine, and, or actually, I is the input. You remember that, again, so we have our input comes right before the arrow, so we're passing I in. We haven't declared what it is yet, but essentially map is allowing us to operate each item, I, in our group of names, we're going to do some function on. So if I index 0 equals B, okay, so for each item in this group of names, if the first letter, that's not right, if the first letter of that item is B, we're going to do some stuff. We're going to return I, okay? Otherwise, nope. Otherwise, we're going to return false. Oh, it's all lowercase in this language. Delightful. Just fine. Just fine. Okay, and again, you can already kind of tell that like stuff like this is going to get pretty soupy. It's easy to get kind of lost when you're writing really complex functions or things that do lots of stuff. That you're going to have lots of these things at the bottom, and you're going to spend a lot of time making sure that you got your order of parentheses and curly braces set up correctly. But let's call it and see what happens. B names, and that's a function, so we need to do that thing. Okay. But again, this is the same. Again, just if you're a little confused about what's going on here, go back up and look at the different kinds of functions. B names is not a function. That's true. It is not a function. It has a function inside of it. Okay, so there's our map object. It goes over all of them. It found Brock. It had that first one that came back true. Or it came back as a, it did in fact have a capital B as the first index. And that's why I pulled that back. Delightful. Moving on. There's like 20 lines of code left. We'll be all right. We'll live here. Okay. Long form of .map. So let b names test equal function, and it will take nothing. And we're going to let test array equal an empty list. For let I equal 0, I is going to be less than group of names dot length. Okay, so again, it's going to just operate on all of the items in our group of names. And then we're going to iterate up by 1 each time. Very cool. If group of names I 0. Okay, so this is going to go for each item in our group of names, right? It's just a simple for loop. We're just iterating through each item in that loop and saving that item's value to I each time, because we're going by location where we're indexing using I as our index. We're going to say if that is equal to B, then what will we do? Test array dot push. Okay, this is like appending in Python, right? So you've got your test array, and we're going to push something into there. Group of names, index I. Okay, but if we don't want that, we're going to return. Oh, well, it's just not going to do anything, right? If that's not true, nothing will happen. Return test array. Delightful. Let's see what happens when we log it. And this is a function, unlike the last one. The last one was a map object. Okay. And this time we're actually pulling back a list. And this time, here we go. We have our one list item, right? Instead of the map object, we have our single object there, or our list object, or our array that only has one thing. There you go. And some of the differences between lists and array have to do with how they're stored in memory. That really shouldn't bite you in the butt very often, but if you're ever out there in the real world, in the great beyond, working at a unnamed company, out there being a professional, being rockin' awesome, until suddenly your array is not behaving correctly. You're working with big data structures. But you shouldn't be working in big data structures with JavaScript anyways. So why am I telling you this? Anyways, there's some subtle differences with how they're stored in your RAM memory, but shouldn't be a problem, especially during our course. So we'll keep moving on. All right, so dot filter. Woo woo. Let long names equal group of names dot filter. We're going to take element, and for each element, we're going to filter it for if each element is a greater length than 4. And so this will actually end up saving this process to long names, right? So it's going to look through each element in group of names, and if it is greater than a length of 4, it will filter that and put some of the things into long names. So let's see which one. Console.log long names. And we should get back eventually, right? Just these ones because they're longer than 4 characters, right? So Ben and Bash don't end up hanging out. Sad for them. All right. And last we have dot reduce. I do not know off the top of my head if reduce is still commonly used. I remember in Python it's kind of outdated, and they say just use a for loop instead. But in JavaScript it does exist, and I'm not sure how popular it is. I haven't run across it. I've never had to use reduce, and again, you can write this with a for loop instead. But 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 in my nums, and let nums reduced equals nums dot reduce, and whoops, we'll have accumulator and current num, and we're going to use an arrow function. So that'll be what we take in is an accumulator and a current num, and we're going to return the accumulator, and we're going to add the current num to it. And so let's see what this does. Console.log nums reduced. Okay, so it ends up with 30. And so because the accumulator is whatever it did before, let's see, previous value and then current value. You can also have current indexes and array locations as things that you can pass in. But specifically, this calls back the specified callback function for all of the elements in the array. The return value of the callback function is the accumulated result, and it's provided in the argument of the next call to the callback function, right? So every time that the reduce runs, and again, this is a loop, so this is right up there with, hey, when we're trying to figure out the big O notation of my cool JavaScript function, okay, keep in mind, this is a list, and it's going to go this plus this, and then that total plus the next thing, and then that total plus the next thing, and that's what our reduce is doing here, okay? You could also do this with a for loop without too much difficulty, but that does exist. A couple other things that, again, they're not quite in the scope because we're just not going to use them all that often, and conceptually you already understand them. You can also use methods like .join, .slice, .search, and .splice. Again, we're not going to go over those in too much detail because conceptually you understand those from Python, and you can Google those things. This is part of being a programmer. You say, hey, either you use something that I don't know, or I'm just going to go and read some documentation, right? Like, again, it's not hard to look for stuff in here. Let's see. Functions, well, getter and setter is some interesting stuff. There's all our for stuff. We're not gotten to classes yet. Closures will be fun. Arrays, all that other stuff. JavaScript guide. Anyways, it's all in here. And you can prototype.join. Okay, the .join method. And then you just read about it. How does this work? Okay, and it returns a string, so on and so forth. You can figure it out on your own. You are smart, capable people. Anyways, onward. That is our, it says day 1, but really it's just document 1. So that'll work out. And this is a long video, so thanks for hanging out for this long. Hope you have a great day or evening or whatever time you do this in the future. See you soon.